Welcome and thanks for joining us today. I'm Karin England. I'm a landscape architect and a park planner with Metro Vancouver Regional Parks, and I'm your host today for this half-hour Facebook Live session. This is the fifth installment of a six-part Grow Green live stream series on gardening topics. After each broadcast, the videos are posted to our Facebook page. You can watch them later at your convenience. You can't stay for the whole thing today. In celebration of upcoming National Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st, our theme this week is native plant gardening. Before we go any further, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land we live on is the shared ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish First Nations. As a gardener and as someone who works with the land as part of my profession, I would like to express my gratitude for the example set by Indigenous peoples of how to live with a deep connection to nature. National Indigenous Peoples Day provides us with an opportunity to learn more about Indigenous peoples' history, reconciliation, and calls to action. And I'd invite you to take a look at resources on these topics. They can be found in many places, including on the Government of Canada website. Part of my work with Metro Vancouver has been to collaborate on the creation of a free tool that supports people who want to garden in a more sustainable way. And I would like to share that tool with you now. This is the Grow Green Guide website. You can find it at growgreenguide.ca. And it was developed in collaboration with the UBC Botanical Gardens. So you know that the information that they provided us is locally appropriate and trustworthy. It's got a few different kinds of information that we're sharing. One are pre-generated designs for your space. It also has information about plants that we recommend for growing in the region, including native plants. So if you were to select that tool and narrow your results, select native plants, you can see that there are 49 different native plants that we have recommended for growing in garden conditions in our region, available here. And if you want more information about each plant, you can click on it. It'll take you through to detailed information about each of those plants. We also have information about how to garden. We've got news posts, blog posts, and there are some links down here that I think are some of the most interesting features of the site. You can send us your gardening questions, and staff from the UBC Botanical Garden will get you an answer. Or you can join our mailing list and you'll receive updates about the Grow Green Guide program from the Grow Green Guide team. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our guest speaker for today. I'm very excited that she's here to join us. This is Lori Snyder. She is a Métis herbalist and educator, as speaker and a foodscape consultant. How cool is that if you could say that you were a foodscape consultant? Welcome, Lori.
Thank you, Karin. Thank you so much for the team for inviting me to come and share what's deep in my heart. So thanks.
We're very excited to have you here today. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and about your passion for native plants.
Okay, so what I tell the kids, because I go into a lot of schools, in high schools, that I was born back in the 60s up in Squamish. And, it was my next door neighbor who was from Ireland who didn't know any of the plants because, of course, the species are different in Ireland than here. And she would walk us kids up the back trails up to Alice Lake, and she would introduce us. So the Douglas fir, the fireweed, the miner's lettuce, all of these incredibly beautiful plants that really made an imprint on me, right? And so that always really stayed with me. And that's what I would say is quite interesting today, at how few of us actually know the native plants that are growing around us. So the first part is always the introduction, right? And then the other piece was I didn't grow up knowing about my native history at all. I'm Métis, as you mentioned, which is a blending of the fur traders. My grandmothers were marrying the fur traders that were coming over from Scotland and from France. And unfortunately, my mother never really spoke much about our history at all, as she had grown up with a lot of discrimination. So she just thought, it's a good way to help protect my children. And which is, I understand that, but on the other hand, it's really, I feel it's so important in this day and age that we all know the stories of how we came to live here, that we also know the stories of the people of this land. And then what we start to see is there's really no difference between us at all. So yeah, and just really grateful for Mrs. Brunn for that beginning of that journey, where I then, studied aromatherapy, herbology, permaculture, and now I get to share what I love so much.
It's a wonderful way of looking at plants. I like the way that you say that you were introduced to plants as if they were living creatures with agency of their own. I think that's very powerful. Do you think that there's a difference in the way that you view plants and horticulture in general as compared to someone with my training, say as a landscape architect?
Well, I can only speak from my own point of view, where it's recognizing everything is living. And I remind everyone that we are part of nature. We are a biological organism that is living, that is impacted by the sun like everything else. So, the more we put value back in that diversity that we actually need around us, the stronger we can be. And, I'm saying to the kids, my vision is to live until I'm 100. So I'm 57 now. So I've got a little ways to go, and that I want them all to come and celebrate with me when I turn 100. But there's a couple of reasons. One is I'm so curious to see where we're going. And also I've shared with these young students, I want to be part of the solution. So for us to really be strong and healthy, we need to make sure the environment is strong and healthy. And, as Chief Dan George spoke about, was, he did this beautiful quote about his children, his grandchildren, and, were they going to curse him when they couldn't meet all of these species that are slowly starting to disappear? Or were they going to remember him with fondness because he did everything he could to protect the water, to protect the land, and make sure there was enough room for, the salmon to be here, the orcas to be here, the butterflies, the bees, everyone to be here. So diversity, we also see in the human family, and we need that diversity within the human family as well. So yeah, I hope I answered that question there.
I think you answered it beautifully. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. We've had maybe some people who are joining us today who, sometimes we get people who are new gardeners, sometimes we get people who are quite experienced gardeners. Could you tell us what you mean when we refer to a native or an indigenous plant species?
Well, what I would refer to that is a plant that has been here for prior to the colonists and the settlers coming. And when you look back in history, there's a few things that happened. One is to actually get land. This, I'm talking mostly on the East Coast. I don't know if that was sort of the same guidelines. But when you were given land as a settler, you were asked to cut all the trees down, right? Or cut the forest down, so then you could start to grow food. The other thing is, we as humans, because of what we've been imprinted with that geography, with that flora and fauna around us, we get homesick. And so we started, bringing in a lot of our own plants, and which of course impacts our environment in terms of our birds and butterflies and all those other species, because all of a sudden they don't have their food source anymore. So what I would describe as our native or indigenous plants are the plants prior to the settlers and the colonists coming, before they started to bring all of, plants from other parts of the planet.
Mm-hmm. You've spoken, not like we've spoken a lot, but you have mentioned that you think that there are some plants that have been here for so long that they have become kind of part of the plants that are the naturalized palette here.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah. So when doing the research in some of the ethnobotany books, what I found interesting, because every time I went into a schoolyard, and what I find is there's not necessarily a lot of native plants even within our geography, like in our gardens, even in our parks. A lot of times we're showcasing other species of plants from other parts of the planet. So when I go in the schoolyard, maybe I'd only find one or two native plants, but I'd always find the dandelion and the plantain and the chickweed and others that we might be calling weeds, which I would refer to as more as wild plants. And so I was like, wow, how long ago did these plants come? And as Indigenous people, as First People, were we using these plants? And sure enough, when you go into the ethnobotany books, yeah, 500 years ago, when the dandelion and the plantain were showing up, we started that relationship. Oh, we can eat it. It's a medicine. It's a food. And what I love about that is to think about it, that these plants have naturalized, but also they're good guests because they have something to offer. Right. So,
right.
Thinking when we're coming here, what skills are we bringing? What stories are we bringing? What knowledge are we bringing? What medicine and food are we bringing? So, that's really how we want to be a good guest on someone else's land, right?
That's great. I've got some guests coming to my house on Friday for socially distant. I'm going to remind them that it's good to bring something.
Yes.
Give them the opportunity to be a good guest. That's great. If there are Indigenous plants that are growing around us in the wild, why is it important that we plant them in our gardens and our urban landscapes?
I would say I'm not seeing enough of them in our urban landscape. And it's not about really redesigning your garden, it's just adding into that. Putting in those beautiful berries, putting in some of those flowers that we're not seeing, that, have become even quite rare. But that's what the bees and the butterflies are looking for. That's what they know to be here because they've been coming here for such a long time. And it just feels good that we can, again, that when we go into the forest, that we're all of a sudden going, oh yes, now I know who this plant is because I also have it growing in my garden.
Right. You mentioned berries. I imagine there are a lot of Indigenous edible food plants that are growing that we didn't realize were edible. Could you give us some examples of those?
Yes. I was just up at the Medicine Wheel Garden this morning up at Moberly Arts and Cultural Center because it's such a beautiful day. I was like, I got to get outside. And of course, people come by the garden. And, for me, I feel it's really important to just be continually educating. And so I was pointing out the salmon berry, the Saskatoon berry, the Oregon grape, blueberries, strawberries, wild plum. And one of the women that came by, she's like, are you sure I can eat this? And I said, but this is what I do, right? I want you to know, I want you to understand that this is the food source of this land. And, some of the things that really kind of got me thinking in terms of doing the teachings was, how come we're not eating the foods of this land? If I go traveling somewhere else, I for sure, get into that cuisine. And then what also came up for me was, how does that impact us? How does that connect us deeper into the land when we're actually eating the food of this land? Because if we look at languages, stories, songs, it's usually coming from the land. It's coming from the plants, right? We're being inspired by what we're seeing and witnessing around us to bring that forward into our lives, right? So, it makes me feel like the more we're actually eating the native foods of this land, where we can really tap in and then really want to protect it and keep it strong, so our children's children will be able to have what we're witnessing and having right now.
Mm-hmm. We've had a question from someone. I think they must have heard what you were saying about school grounds. They're saying, what native plants would you suggest growing in a school ground?
So the Saskatoon berry, which is also known as Juneberry or service berry, it's blooming right, or it's ripening right now. So I'm always trying to think, what can we be growing so the kids can actually have that access to them? So strawberries and the Saskatoon berries. The Oregon grape, even though the grape comes a little bit later, it's a beautiful plant for some medicines, but also for some dyes. It also is a great plant for a hedgerow. So instead of us putting up fences, we could actually start to do hedgerows. And because it's, prickly, the leaf is prickly like a holly, it sort of has a bit of a message, ask permission before you come in, right? And of course, those types of bushes are really important for our birds, the smaller birds, so they've got places to hide and protect themselves from the hawks. Roses, then you can harvest the rose hips in the fall. Nodding onions, because the kids love eating onions. They love eating chives, and here is our native plant that we can be putting in there. And the other thing is, then we can collect the seeds. And what's beautiful about the seeds, that's part of the education that we have to think about. Okay, we're seed savers, and we have to share those seeds outwards. But the other thing about the nodding onion seeds, which I think is so beautiful, is we can actually take them up to the woods, and the bears can eat them, and the deer and the elk. So, what I want to remind everyone as the two-leggeds, that we're caretakers, right? That's part of our purpose, is to ensure that everything is strong and healthy around us, so we can be strong and healthy.
That's a great message. And a great message to be giving our youth, I think, that, we can be looking around the world around us and making sure that we're taking care of it. I have tasted before the new growth, the coppery green growth on Oregon grape, and eaten it as a green. Would you recommend that? Or what does that do to the plant over time if you're constantly nibbling at its new growth?
Right. Well, it's always lovely to, making sure you identify your plant properly and tasting it. That's getting in relationship, right? Oh, you're a little sour and tart. Okay, what does sour tell us when we have a sour food? Well, it's high in vitamin C, and vitamin C is so important for our immune system, right? And in this time that we're living, what we need to know is, how does our body function? How do we keep the body strong and healthy? And then if we get sick, we get that sore throat, what do we take? We take the vitamin C to help support the immune system. Now, the other thing that I'd mentioned, Karin, is when we're snipping our plants a little, pulling a little pieces off, what's happening is the roots, it actually sends a message to the plant, and it sends more roots down, and then it produces more leaf, which will actually take out more carbon. So, again, they're going to be your plants. Is it going to be like a kale where you're constantly pulling at it, or are you just going to have an opportunity to taste it, and again, build that relationship with them more?
Right. So there is some medicinal value, I suppose, to eating the new growth of the Oregon grape. What are some other examples of medicines that can be harnessed from native plants?
Well, let me think. Yarrow, even though it's not one of our native plants, it's a naturalized plant, and so you do find it. A lot of the nations have really embraced that plant, for instance. And the yarrow is one. There's a few things. It's a biological control in the garden, so it's attracting the carnivore insects that eat the herbivore insects. Right? So it's going to eat the insects that are eating your lettuce. And Yarrow it's a food source, so we can eat a little bit of those greens in the early spring. And that's that reminder for us to get into seasonal eating, right? Because we're that biological organism that's affected by the sun. And so we can use that in our greens. It's got a little bit of bitter to it. Bitter is important. It gets the gallbladder producing the bile, which then gets into the stomach and helps to break down the fats, because we need to be eating fats to feed the brain. So what I love as I get to know more and more plants is we start to see these affinities to certain organs and how it's supporting the internal side of the body. The yarrow can also be harvested, dried, put in oils for healing skin salve. So what I'm doing is I'm melting beeswax, I'm taking that infused plant oil, and that could be yarrow, it could be calendula flowers, it could be the plantain, it can be the dandelion, it could be the pitch from the Douglas fir. So who's the cedar trees, the beautiful green from that. So these can all be beautiful medicines that help to heal the skin, antimicrobial in their properties. And another way that I use the yarrow is I'll infuse it in some vinegar. So vinegars are really important to extract out minerals. And why do we need the minerals? Not just for our bones and our teeth, but we also need it for our endocrine system. So this is really going to help to balance our hormones. So what an incredible plant that, you know, is giving me some foods, it's giving me some minerals, it's nutritive for me, it's helping to repair my skin. What a gift.
All from one plant. It's incredible. Yeah. We've had a question from someone who I think is inspired to try this. They said, what native plants do you recommend for beginner gardeners to try?
Well, you know, there's a few things. And something I was just mentioning the other day or this morning in the garden to one of the neighbors is, depending on what size your garden is, I'm a big proponent of growing berries. Berries cost a lot of money. They're coming long distances. They're full of antioxidants, and we can tell by color of food what type of medicine or food source is in there based on food. And what if I heard we should be eating a rainbow of food every day? But, you know, the dark purples and the black foods are really, really important. Now, carrots and potatoes, you know, they're fairly inexpensive compared to buying a little pint of blueberries from the grocery store for maybe, you know, I've seen them as expensive as $7. So and the other thing about what's beautiful about berries, they don't take as much time. So if you're really pressed for time, what you're going to do is put those beautiful berry plants in. That can be blueberries, black currants, raspberries, strawberries, Oregon grapes, salal berries, the Saskatoon, the wild plum. You're just going to have to caretake the soil and maybe do some pruning once a year. So that's a little bit easier to manage. And I think, you know, growing vegetables, you know, you've got to really be paying attention to your soil. You've got to be rotating your crops. You know, they're more delicate to start with, so you're really having to water them a lot. So sometimes maybe you're not having as much success with your vegetables, which can be a little just, you know, like, oh, well, forget that, I'm not going to do it. Versus, you know, caretaking a beautiful blueberry plant, and you need at least two by my, you know, that I mentioned, then you may have more success with that.
Right. And they're quite beautiful plants in their own right. I grow Evergreen Huckleberry in my yard as a hedge. It's not a typical cedar or yew hedge, but it does, after several years, make a hedge. The bees love it when it's blooming, so I'm supporting pollinators. And the coppery new growth in the spring is a gift. It's beautiful to look at. And it provides me for a long season fantastically delicious berries. It's not only a food plant, it serves a lot of other purposes too.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and those tiny little berries. Like I've harvested them as late as January,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
wow, how beautiful, right?
To be honest, they never actually make it into the house. I pick them and I eat them as fast. I've heard that they make the best pie, but I will never know because I'll never make it into my kitchen. Yeah, we've had a question about yarrow. Do all colors of yarrow have the same medicinal value? No.
No, it's the white yarrow. So what is that? The millefolium I'm terrible at my Latin names. The millefolium. So the white is the one who is the medicinal of the yarrows.
Right. Is it because are some of the other ones cultivars that are not the native plant, but they've been monkeyed around with to find a
Yeah. And we have to be mindful of the nativars that a lot of times they don't provide any pollen, or there's too many petals and the bees can't get in there, or even the color um, um, won't necessarily attract those pollinators. So they can look really beautiful. And the thing that I would say to people when planning your garden is really to have a diversity in the garden. So you've got some vegetables, you've got some blueberries, or some berry plants, you've got some pollinator plants, you also have your cut flowers, right? Because a lot of cut flowers are being grown in greenhouses. A lot of insecticides and herbicides are used. So let's enjoy what's growing out in the garden and bring them in our house for ourselves as well, right? Like that's part of why we're doing it, because it brings so much joy to us, which is really important, that we as a species, we have this ability to feel joy. So let's do and cultivate that for ourselves.
It's about creating a relationship with the plants that grow around us in this region naturally. I have a question here about a comment that I think I saw on your website about letting plants teach you. I don't know, would you like to speak to that?
Well, I just did a flower essence course the other day, teaching how to make a flower essence. And that was in the research when I was looking, it had that question: could you consider, plants being your teachers? And, they are our teachers, right? And how much they are actually providing for us, the food, the medicines, the dyes, the ability to make tools, instruments, weave with them. Like, wow, what an incredible gift. And I'm just really new to gardening myself, and what I find being up at the garden with up at Moberly is sort of I feel the garden guides me as I've got my hands in the earth and I'm observing what's going on. I'm really asking her to, bring what needs to be planted next, or for me to go, what, that's not the best area for that particular plant. I can dig that up and I can move them. And in the flower essences, just going back to the flower essences. So today I made flower essences with buttercup, because everyone always says, what can we do with buttercup?
Yeah.
And what's fascinating about a flower essence, this is actually working on a vibrational level for our emotional health. And buttercup is about changes, transformation, transition. So maybe going to a new school, moving, across the country, maybe going through menopause, right? Going through puberty. Like those are big changes for us. And what it does is it helps to support us through that time. So, wow, thank you to the buttercup to give me that teaching and help me support, especially in this time that we're in right now. We don't really know where the future is leading us. So this can help to our emotional state to stay calm and grounded as we, keep moving forward.
How did you make the essence, Lori?
So the teaching is, and you know, based on a few different teachers, they might say 20 minutes to 3 hours. So what I'm going to do is take some beautiful spring water, and they suggest crystal, and I'm going to cut the flowers that are just opened. So, you know, nice, vibrant flowers, and I'm going to fall them into my cup or my bowl. I'm not going to touch them. I don't want to put my energy into them. And I'm going to let them sit in the sun for at least, like I said, probably up to 3 hours. It's a solar infusion. So the sun is actually helping to take the imprint, the message, the knowledge, that wisdom of that plant, and place it into the water. And then I'm going to take my dropper bottle, and I'm going to fill it up half with brandy. And then after 3 hours, I'm going to put my water in here. And this is known as the mother. So now I'm going to take another bottle, and I don't have another demonstration. So I have another bottle, and I'm going to fill it up half and half with brandy and the spring water. And then I'm going to take anywhere from 3 drops to 9 drops out of my mother and put in my dose bottle. And when I'm feeling those emotions, I'm just going to drop some under my tongue. So there's Bach flower remedies, rescue remedies. We can use them with our animals. We can use them with our plants. This was developed back in the 1930s by Dr. Edward Bach. And he was, his career started off as a bacterialist. He actually was working on vaccines. Then he went into the homeopathic and did some homeopathic vaccines. And then the last part of his life, he only lived until he was 50. He worked with flower essences to recognize the piece that we never look at when it comes to dis-ease is our emotional state. So this is all about helping for our emotional state. And think about how emotional we've all been in these last couple months. You know, how, you know, uncertain it's been. So, you know, the more, the calmer we are in the storm, the better we can make good decisions and, you know, pass on that information to our children and make sure that they're staying safe without it being about fear.
Right.
So flower essences are really incredibly potent and gentle medicines for our body, for our emotions.
Interesting. I've never tried that, but I'm going to have to give it a try.
Yeah, please do.
It's probably time to start wrapping up for today. Is there any last messages that you'd want to share with our audience, Lori?
Okay, so if I could quickly just say, this is something we talk about in the schools. You know, it's about us having respect, right? Respect for the land. It's about developing our relationship to the land and the plants and the people and, you know, our neighbors, even ourselves, right? This has been an inward journey. It's about reciprocity. So as we're taking care of our home is taking care of us. And we have a responsibility, right? As the two-leggeds, we have a responsibility. And the other thing is we need to remember our gratitude, our reverence for the fact that we live in one of the most incredible places on the planet that is so strong and so healthy in its environment. We need to keep it strong. In fact, we need to make sure, you know, the salmon are doing well, so the orcas are doing well, like, you know, the bears are doing well. That is part of who we are as the, you know, the human family. And the last thing I just want to put a little shout out for a couple people is Lori Weidenhammer, who wrote a beautiful book called Victory Gardens for Bees. So it was Lori who started me on this journey in teaching and sharing what's deep in my heart. I also want to mention Stephanie Rose, who has garden therapy. So there's lots of DYAs on there, or DYIs, excuse me. And she just wrote her 10th book, which is called Garden Alchemy. So this is about what plants we can use for herbicides and insecticides, so we can get off our chemicals. I also want to mention the David Suzuki Foundation and the Butterfly Rangers. That's part of what I've been working on, is bringing awareness around all the native plants so we can make sure butterflies and friends are growing strong. And for all the rangers here and in the greater Vancouver area and Metro Vancouver area that are working diligently to share that knowledge outward. And also my teacher, Don Olson, who has grassroots herbalism. And then, of course, you, Karin, today, Jay, Zach, Jack, and Tara for inviting me to come. I'm so grateful that I get to share what's in my heart.
Well, thank you, Lori. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and your passion with us. I really sincerely appreciate it. Thank you so much. Before we sign off, I wanted to highlight another great article by Douglas Justice, who was our speaker last week. He's written an article called Gardening with Native Plants. It's available at growgreenguideblog.ca. For people who have had questions that we didn't have a chance to answer during our talk today, we will provide written responses within the discussion section of the Facebook Lives as soon as we can get to them. Don't give up on us, there's an answer coming. And we would like to invite you to join us again next week, Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. And Winnie Ho is going to be here from the David Suzuki Foundation, the same organization that Lori mentioned. And she's going to be speaking with us about pollinators. So until next week, I hope that you get a chance to get out and enjoy your garden.
Mm-hmm.